asked, do we have a steady pipeline of bankable green projects which will then take up this capital?
The answer is yes. It's about building, you know, as John said, how do you start having appetite for lower margins? Because in the past, I think we've been chasing, you know, those larger margins. So reorienting organizations into sustainability, into reduced margins, to be able to fund that. But also, I think, Julians, a bigger issue is balancing priorities and demands. Because while you're funding, you want to fund, you know, what I call green projects and so forth. You still have all these other here and now demands. And I think that the conversations like this make sure that we prioritize green funding. So the answer is yes.
Thank you for that. Let me come back to John. And in the interest of time, I want to pick some questions from here as I filled my own, so we don't have to take a Q&A at the end of it. John, the question is being asked that are our markets deep enough? Our capital markets, I believe, for that matter, because the context being drawn here is that ever since Kenya unveiled the green bond agenda, we have only seen one go-to-market.
I think, look, Paul mentioned something now, which is about priorities. Yeah, we've gone through 3 years of COVID, Ukraine, and of course, governments have spent a lot of money on sustainability. I think the ambassador has said about her country how they have redirected some of the money to help communities overcome the effects of COVID. I think it's in that context one has to look at that question. It's been in the last 3 years. Green Board was being done right before COVID. It's been 3 years of us dealing with COVID. Stock markets are depressed, unfortunately. Debt markets are even more depressed, unfortunately. So I think that question must be seen in that respect. But in the normal times, are they deep enough? I think you asked an earlier question about opportunities. One thing I would say is this country, and I think my friend there mentioned, 93% of our energy is green energy. Kenya is a leading country. That energy has been financed by banks. And I'm proud to say NCB is one of the biggest financiers of green energy, geothermal energy projects in this country. And we continue to support. So the opportunities are there. Is it deep enough, you ask? Look, in the right setting, it's more than deep enough. That bond that was floated a few years ago, I believe was oversubscribed in Kenya and globally, indeed. So I think it's green enough. I believe my friend Paul, in his remarks, he talked about the amount of money they've raised towards green projects. And again, although it's raised by one bank, I think you can think of it as banks have found a way to raise this privately without using the stock market. But if the stock market were to go to the stock market, it would be extremely, extremely available. I do want to comment, Julius, about a question you asked about the carbon tax very quickly. And just to say, you know, I think of it as prescribing a very healthy, balanced diet, nutritious, balanced diet to a person who is starving. When they're starving, all they want is to eat. And I think most of Africa today, I think statistics show that 750 million people in the world are not connected to electricity. Majority of them in Africa. 2 billion people in the world are still surviving on charcoal for cooking. Again, majority of them in the world. So when you tell somebody, do not use charcoal, or you tell somebody, think about green energy, when they don't have access to energy, I think we have to think about it that the balanced diet that we are prescribing, it has to be the right one for the right person. But as businesses, we are in a position where I think we can at least take that prescription. And I believe that's the journey that we're starting.
Thank you for that intervention, John. And let me bring Your Excellency Giovanna. There's a question here asking, given the Costa Rica experience, what are 2 policy imperatives you can give a country like Kenya to navigate this journey?
Well, let's see. From our experience, I think specifically the National Adaptation Plan, I think, was a key element. And I negotiated for Costa Rica 6 years at UNFCCC. So I know that world and that process and the Paris Agreement, and I think all the great things that came out, but they take time. They surely do. And I think the National Adaptation Plan, which was extremely inclusive process with all the local communities. What were their needs? So bottom to top approach, I think, is vital. And we did the same exercise with our national decarbonization plan, 2018-2050. National Adaptation Plan is 2018 to 2030. So from our experience is, as I mentioned before, strong public policies, medium and long term, but of course it has to be done with the local communities, local governments, regional, provincial, and then national. Otherwise, it's not going to work, for sure.
Dr. Richard, let me bring you in here. And someone is asking about the role of academia as far as innovative financing is concerned.
Yeah, very important question. You cannot be able to drive transformational, and I'll keep using this word, transformational climate action, because if you don't put it within the vision of national development, you are never really going to go that far. And the easiest way is to integrate this within the school curriculum. But one of the biggest aspects that needs to be done is that I talked about artisans here, Juakale. 80% of the work in the continent is created in the informal sector. And it is Juakale artisans that are turning agricultural waste into fuel briquettes that are 2 to 4 times more effective than charcoal. And if you are to invest in them, you can be able to tap into a 20 billion charcoal market across the entire continent and 1.6 billion in Kenya. Why am I saying this? Developing curriculum, climate action, entrepreneurship, where every student is taught at every levels of education is the best way to drive this transformational climate action. And the United Nations Environment Program have been working with universities, where we have the first climate action curriculum that have been developed in Nasarawa State University in Nigeria and by Esago University in Botswana. Why I am bringing this up is that if we don't leverage this different approach and a paradigm shift to start bringing climate entrepreneurship into the educational curriculum, we might have all the money and still at the same time not have the human capital, which is the sovereign capital that we need, which are people's skills and talents.
Geoffrey, interesting question coming in here. When we talk about carbon credit markets especially, are they structured in a way that is favorable to frontier markets, especially in Africa?
Yeah, and that's true. We realized, for example, the first clean development mechanism markets that came in, it took so long for Africa to effectively be able to tap into it. By the time Africa was ready to engage in the CDM, the prices were collapsing and the market was having a bit of problems. So the reality here is that perhaps Africa needs to move with speed. We need to learn to be early bloomers. You really will never be ready. You will never sit behind until everything is completely negotiated on the negotiating front. What you need to do is ensure that you are agile and adept, and you understand that the future for now is carbon markets. Countries need to immediately ensure that they have the right policies, regulatory frameworks to support the engagement in the carbon markets. For instance, here in Kenya, we already have 5 projects that have been able to receive resources on the carbon markets, but the regulatory framework is yet to be put in place. UNDP is just discussing right now with the government to help them put in place some of these regulatory frameworks, including even defining what carbon is, because carbon has become a very important asset. It actually is a national asset that needs to be regulated properly so that whoever comes into the country and trades in carbon understands that it's trading in Kenyan carbon, which is coming from Kenyan natural resources. So it's important to ensure that the regulatory framework is put in place as fast as possible. It's important to ensure that we build capacity within government, especially because this is where most of the discussions happen. You have government officers who are negotiating these things. They need to have the capacity to effectively negotiate the best deals in terms of the carbon market environment. Thirdly, and most importantly, is private sector. We in the UN, and Richard here will tell you, we have observed that the resource envelope has been dwindling over time. And the reality is that we are moving away from funding to financing. And that's why most of these things are being converted into investment plans, investment ideas. And the question will come, is it viable? Yes, carbon markets are viable, but we need to engage our private sector here to also invest in the carbon markets. Before we even get private sector from globally, I will be very happy to see Peter here investing in the local carbon markets and putting up a 1 million hectare plantation of forests. And it will also unlock new opportunities. For example, we'll see the young people going into agroforestry. We'll have orchards being established of avocados, mangoes, and this will immediately also open up new opportunities for Kenya to grow its export market. So I think I would like to challenge the private sector also to analyze the opportunities that the carbon market avails, but also the opportunities that engagement in, for example, forestry and rangeland restoration can be able to give them as a business diversification strategy. So yes, it's possible, and we are seeing some countries benefiting from it. Costa Rica there did benefit a lot from the carbon market, particularly in the earlier days, and we are really working with government right now to ensure that we can effectively have the right architecture to benefit from the carbon market conversation.
Thank you. Paul, I can see you looking at your watch. This is my question now to you, and this question can only be taken by you and John, I believe. After you, will be taking closing remarks. So someone is asking, why can't banks come together, take some of the money they put in fixed income assets, deploy it towards the climate financing?
There's no reason why we can't do that. Let me just be helpful. And I think, Julian, it is for us to succeed in this space, we have to park competition and come together.
I think it needs a round of applause for that, please.
There is absolutely no way we are going to succeed in this space if we continue in the lines of competition for profitability. We must collectively bring resources, whether local as well as what we mobilize, to have funding that can be meaningfully deployed. I think if you let me be biased, given where I come from. So north of Isiolo, right? You need meaningful funding to turn northern Kenya into, get us out of pastoralism and banditry and etc. But how many single institutions would bet on that initiative? So we must come in and share risks. We must come in and whether our foundations and how we deploy it, we must bring them into a pool and deploy it to create scale, to create meaning.
Thank you for that. I'd like us to take closing remarks. I'm told we have 9 minutes only to go. So let me start from Her Excellency here, going that way. And John, as you give your closing remarks, please chime in on that point.
Thank you very much. Well, I really appreciate all the inputs from the panelists. I think it's been extremely rich, and I think this is going to be a very important forum today, the rest of today and tomorrow, to see exactly how we can tackle climate change, but again, not only from this adaptation mitigation vision. I really think we have to look at it in a more holistic way, because I think so far it's been kind of a, thinking of the finance world, it's either mitigation or it's adaptation. And at the end of the day, there's so many co-benefits, and I see it in my country from our national livestock strategy, our national coffee producers with all of the cooperatives being part of this. So it's not just about mitigation or adaptation, it's really the overall picture. So I thank you very much for this opportunity, and to you, thank you for sharing your ideas, and look forward to the rest of this festival. Thank you.
Thank you. John.
Thank you, Julian. I want to again thank Nation Media Group Chairman CEO for convening us here today to have this wonderful conversation. I think what it comes down to is that climate change, climate mitigation, and adaptation is not about corporates, it's not about the public, it's about individuals. And I think one of the questions I was asking my team as we were discussing this, we do have a project, we call it Project Klima, where we're all trying to understand exactly what role we play, is how do we break it down to my branch manager, how do we break it down to the person, to the teller on the branch, to understand their role and their contribution towards this bigger debate. I think you asked me to comment on what my colleague Paul said. Yes, absolutely, there's no reason we cannot come together. But I think what's also important to note is that the banking sector has been doing something for quite some time. In 2017, we came up with sustainable financing initiatives, and we got all the banks in Kenya to sign up to that initiative. Through that initiative, a total of 30,000 employees of banks in this country were trained, were being made conscious about the whole idea of climate financing, the whole idea of sustainable financing. Thereafter, the central bank came up with the banking charter. And the banking charter, again, What we know today, and people talk about, is the risk-based pricing coming out of that charter. But what people maybe don't know is that that charter talked a lot about how we treat people, how we treat community, how you do sustainable finance. So it took some of the principles that we had developed under the Sustainable Finance Initiative into the banking charter. And as Paul so eloquently said before, beginning of this year, the central bank, again working with banks, rolled out the climate-related risk framework. And under that, every bank has made some commitments that they're reporting to the central bank between this year and mid next year of the things that we're going to be doing very specifically towards mitigating and very specifically towards adaptation to the changing world of climate change. So a lot is happening, maybe in individual basis, but perhaps it would be much better done coming together. Paul, since you're a bigger brother, I'm happy to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Doc, in a minute, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to share ideas here. I would like to leave just 4 points. The first one is that you can only compete from your position of strength. Africa's strength is her youth. The second is we must leverage on people's passion. An inspired person can be able to do that much. And if we inspire our youth, they can take Africa's transformation forward. The third aspect is that the informal sector have a credit facility that is on top of 300 billion. Leveraging accessible cooperatives can be able to tap this. And the last part is that of narrative. We project climate change as a liability. It's an investment opportunity. And therefore, we must be able to reshape that narrative to start showing the opportunities.
Geoffrey, a minute, please.
We have had 3.6 million Kenyans directly being impacted by the ongoing ravaging drought. And not only has it impacted human beings, for the first time we have had a very large number of our wild animals that have been impacted. I think we've lost around 120 elephants within this period alone. Unlike the poachers, because UNDP has been working in programs to reduce poaching, who target the mature elephants, the drought has targeted both the young and the old, and especially the young that have died first. So the reality is that we are seeing this problem becoming even more complex here in the country. And that's why initiatives to do massive restoration of the rangelands and reforestation are critical. And UNDP has worked with government to design the tree growing program and fund. And we are really hoping that in the next 10 years, we'll all get down to work, plant these 300 trees, at least as an individual level. We want to see a lot more corporates coming into this space. We want to see the NGOs coming into this space. We want to have a whole of government and whole of society approach so that we can effectively bequeath to the next generation a cleaner and greener country. I think it's possible. And we think we need to recall that the President is very keen on this and to ask all of us to join this initiative and provide a bit of resources to ensure that we can get the young people who Richard has very eloquently spoken about, involved in this particular activity. But I thank you, and I wish to inform you that UNDP is happy to have partnered with the NTV in organizing this Kusi Festival and looking forward to more engagements in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Paul Russo, please close for us.
Thank you, Julians, and thank you on behalf of KCB for the opportunity. I think I'll go a different route and say, even as we push for these big ideas, we have to make sure that we deliver on sustainable livelihood. Because if, if people can't, as John said, can't put food on the table, then you'll be singing, your own choir. I think there was a recent debate about should we run coal mining in Kitui or not. And the whole subject of debate. So maybe we should also go back to basics, maybe our 4K club, our agricultural extension officers, use of schools to be able to run these initiatives as we look, John and I look for money to do the big things. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's appreciate this panel. And I'd like to thank you specifically for tuning in for our fireside chat. It wasn't a panel, it was very succinct and to the point. I'd like to invite you and to usher you back to your seats. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to hand this back to Larry, who will be guiding us on what follows after this. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. My panelists, John Gashora, please come back for a photo shoot. I'm so sorry about that. Let's have a quick photo there so that we allow them to proceed to their next business. At the center, please, let's get together. That's much better. Yes. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for your very illuminating thoughts on this subject. We appreciate your time.
We must have Peter Degwa in this because he spoke before this panel.
Oh,
so
please.
We cannot leave him on the side as well.
Karibu sana, Peter. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for your insights. We do appreciate for your contribution to this. Are we okay? I think we are. Thank you. Please, you may have your seats.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for that. So, for those joining us live on NTV, we are going to be taking a short break, and of course, we will be back with more panel discussions and more insights from the various speakers. We've got 3 different panels this afternoon, talking about green cities and the making of sustainable urban communities. We're also going to be talking about climate change narratives and mobilizing action. And finally, on Africa faces up to rising climate-related health emergencies. These panels are going to be moderated by Zainab Wandati, Joe Ageo, and of course, Chris Hingenyi in a short while. So we are going to be taking a